And now, Aristocracy in Massachusetts and Virginia, from the William and Mary College Quarterly Historical Magazine. Not long ago, the proof of a work on civil government in the United States was submitted to the editor, on which he made the following comments, now published here, because the errors of the author of the work are the errors of many other writers as well. 1. Massachusetts and Virginia. In this work, the population of Massachusetts is represented as made up in colonial days entirely of middle-class people, and the population of Virginia of an aristocracy of wealthy landowners and a large number of laborers. This is far from the truth. Some of the most aristocratic families in England went to Massachusetts, and Whedon states, Economic History of New England, that Massachusetts in colonial times was democratic in form, but aristocratic in the substance of the administration. Beyond having annual elections, Massachusetts was aristocratic in every feature. Each town was a close corporation, as no one could vote except such as were specially admitted to the franchise by those who already possessed it. Voting was thus a privilege, not a right. Besides being subject to special selection, the privilege of becoming a free man was limited to membership in the Congregational Church, and thus 4/5 of the inhabitants were excluded from the ballot till the latter part of the 17th century. After the Charter of King William in 1691, this narrow policy was discarded to some extent, but down to the Revolution, the suffrage in New England was very limited. Dr. J.F. Jameson shows that just before the Revolution, only half as many people voted in Massachusetts as did in Virginia. When we come to consider the office holders, we find that the forms of election in the New England colonies continued the same men in office indefinitely. No opponent of a magistrate in office could be nominated in a meeting till the incumbent had been voted on and voted out. Writing in 1676, Edward Randolph said that whosoever are of the magistracy in Massachusetts continued till death by the aid of a law requiring the former magistrates to be first put to the vote. In 1651, the General Court of Massachusetts, instead of lumping, as the author of the present work does, all the people of Massachusetts into one class called middle-class people, divided the people into better class, those above the ordinary degree, and those of mean condition. And heavy fines were imposed on poor folks for presuming to wear gold or silver lace, to walk in great boots, or to wear silk or Tiffany hoods or scarves. The powerful minister John Cotton declared that democracy was no fit government either for church or commonwealth, and Governor John Winthrop defended this view in a letter to Reverend Thomas Hooker. The distinctions of rank in Massachusetts, observed Charles Francis Adams Sr. in his Life of John Adams, were followed with punctilious nicety down to the Revolution. Indeed, at Harvard, we are told, students were arranged according to the dignity of their birth or the rank of their parents. When American independence was secured, New England was the seat of the Federalist Party, who looked with abhorrence upon the democratic doctrines of Virginia and Jefferson. The fact is that in spite of all that has been said in regard to the New England town meetings, very few persons attended, and the power was exercised by a select clique in each case. The towns were, in effect, small oligarchies where the voice of the whole people was never heard. Unquestionably, the only system ensuring a real democratic result is the representative system, and the towns in Massachusetts today attempting to conduct a government by a town meeting attest, if they attest anything, the advantages of an aristocracy rather than the advantages of a democracy. While the colonial aristocrat in Massachusetts was not as spectacular as the Virginia aristocrat, and had perhaps not as much of baronial magnificence about him, he was far more powerful politically. There is no part of the country today where family interest in genealogy compares with that in New England. There are genealogical books by the hundreds. The story of how John Randolph, at the second inauguration of Washington, was driven by the coachman of John Adams from coming too near the coat of arms emblazoned on the viceregal carriage is familiar. Massachusetts is probably the only state that has in its constitution a title of honor for its governor, His Excellency. When we write of Virginia in colonial times, Whedon's characterization of New England may be almost reversed. For in form, Virginia was an aristocracy, but in substance, it was a democracy, the most radical in practice in America. The settlers that came in the two first supplies were largely gentlemen of the daring stamp of Drake and Hawkins, old soldiers who had served in the Netherlands. It was only from 1610 to 1642 that society in Virginia was anything like the picture drawn by the author of the work under notice: a few wealthy proprietors and a large mass of white laborers. A large number of white servants were sent over during this period, 1610 to 1642, but most of them perished the first year of their arrival from climatic diseases. Population at the close of this era did not exceed 10,000. A new era began in 1642 when the Civil War in England drove hundreds of the best people to Virginia. The new emigrants came to make homes, not to make tobacco. Many men of landed estates in England came to Virginia, as did many others of the shopping and merchant class. This is confirmed by the land grants and the old deed and other record books examined by the editor. As suggestive of the period of the attention given by people in England at this time to a home in the distant colony are the words of William Hallam, a soldier of Burnham in Essex County, England, 1659. If these troublous times hold long among us, we must be all fain to come to Virginia. After 1675, Negro labor came to be substituted more and more for white labor in eastern Virginia, and there arose a strong middle class of freemen in the colony, as distinguished from the great planters and councilors. In the 76 years from 1700 to 1776, the white population increased from about 70,000 to 296,000, a large part of which were thrifty and intelligent Scotch-Irish people driven by persecution to Virginia. Color, and not class, became the real distinction in Virginia, and every white man in the 18th century had to be accosted in public as Mr., a term of respect. There ceased to be a class of white servants, and this status has continued for the most part to the present day. Thus, politically speaking, Virginia tended to become a leveling political democracy based upon the slavery of the Negro, for if the rich white man by reason of his Negroes were independent of the poor white man, the latter was necessarily compelled to be independent of the rich man. Writing at the time immediately anterior to the Revolution, Judge St. George Tucker said that there was no such thing as dependence of classes in Virginia, and that the aristocracy of Virginia was as harmless a set of men as ever existed. Edmund Randolph, who was one of the aristocrats, referred to the influence of the aristocracy at the beginning of the Revolution as little and feeble and incapable of daring to assert any privilege clashing with the rights of the people at large. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to John Adams in 1814, derided the power of the aristocracy in Virginia both before and after the Revolution, and referred to the traditionary reverence paid to certain families in Massachusetts and Connecticut, which had rendered the offices of those governments nearly hereditary in those families. The existence of a strong middle class in the Virginia colony is shown not only by the records of estates and the growth of power in House of Burgesses, but by the evidence of travelers. Thus, J.F.D. Smith, in his Travels in 1773, after speaking of the first class in Virginia as more respectable and numerous than in any other province in America, and of the real poor people as less in number than anywhere in the world, refers to the great second class as composing half of the population. And this paragraph from Henry Adams' History of the United States is suggestive. Nowhere in America existed better human material than in the middle and lower classes of Virginia. As explorers, fighters, wherever courage, activity, and force were wanted, they had no equals. But they had never known discipline and were beyond measure jealous of restraint. If we now look to the suffrage as it existed in colonial Virginia, we find that while most of the officers were appointed, the House of Burgesses, which controlled the office holders and was the center of power in the colony, rested practically on universal suffrage down to 1736. For though in 1671 the suffrage was limited to freeholders, the amount of the freehold was not defined, and the act only slightly changed the status of things. And when in 1736 the requirement of a definite amount of land was for the first time made, those who participated in elections afterwards were nevertheless twice as numerous as the voters in Massachusetts. Nor were there any rules regarding quality at William and Mary College, nor any election laws affecting the precedence of applicants for office as in New England. The ultimate consequences of society in Virginia and New England were seen after the Revolution, when for the first time the two communities had the opportunity of directing without foreign restraint the government of their country. Virginia became the headquarters of the Democratic Republican Party, the party of popular ideas, and New England that of the Federalist Party, the party aristocratic ideas. It follows from the above that the statement of the author that the body of liberties of Massachusetts was prophetic of the Bill of Rights of later constitutions is not correct. The former established the rule of life for a strictly theocratic aristocracy, the latter the rule of life for a free democracy. The former was based on the Mosaic law, the latter on the natural law. The former recognized slavery, the latter recognized personal freedom only. The former recognized only the Church of Massachusetts, the latter recognized freedom of conscience. The former denounced the punishment of death for many offenses, the latter inhibited cruel and unusual punishments. Parties. I think some corrections advisable in regard to the writer's history of political parties. After 1816, the great Federalist Party became defunct, and in 1824, the Republican Party of Jefferson broke up into 4 factions, led by Jackson, John Quincy Adams, Clay, and Crawford. In 1828, the Adams and Clay men united and formed the National Republican Party, of which the writer says nothing. And the same year, the Jackson and Crawford men united and formed the Democratic Party. In 1832, on account of President Jackson's anti-states' rights views, the Crawford states' rights men began to leave the Democratic Party and to form, with the National Republicans, the Whig Party. The divergent views entertained by the 2 factions prevented the Whigs from agreeing on any platform in 1835 or 1839. After the election in 1840, the attempt of Henry Clay and his National Republicans to revive the issue of a bank, about which nothing had been said in the canvass preceding, caused a split in the party, and President Tyler and many of the other states' rights Whigs, North and South, were driven out of the organization. Though many states' rights men remained, the Whig Party never had any party solidarity, and there was always a northern and southern wing. To the last, their platform was more democratic than otherwise. Thus, in 1844, in spite of their abuse of Tyler, they said nothing in their platform about a bank and avowed themselves for a tariff with incidental protection. Nor did the present Republican Party in 1856 take over the Whigs, as the author seems to think. He means, of course, the Northern Whigs, but this is not entirely true. The larger portion of the Northern Whigs continued a separate organization under the name of the Constitutional Union Party till the war broke out, and then many of its members entered the Democratic Party. It is certainly wrong to say that the present Republican Party has remained true to its Whig and Federalist ancestors. It would be more like history to say its Federalist ancestor, for neither the National Republican Party nor the Whig Party ever admitted any connection with the Federalist Party. The Whig Party was always a compromise party, and in its origin, 1834 to 1840, claimed to be more states' rights than the Democratic Party.